forward. All right. A couple of you have sent me private messages. Yes. And yeah. Yes. Yeah. Good job, Crystal. You just got that completely right, what you said in a private chat. So put in any last guesses here, or think about names and where those names would occur, if you can pick up any names here, or some of them are capitalized, but other words are capitalized too, so that might throw you off. So let me, oh, I gotta keep the chat window up. Okay, so let's talk about words that you recognize. So feel free to unmute and see what names or words you can pick up in this. Yeah, so say that out loud. So feel free to unmute. What names do you see here? Let's see how many names we can find.
The two that I see are, I think it's a Mary down where the cursor is now.
Yeah,
and
this is Mary.
And then David, Delta, Alpha, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think
yeah,
that's what I got.
David. Yep, Mary and David. Good. What other proper names do we see here?
I got on the first slide. Maybe I'm on the really ancient, more on the ancient language than the biblical, because I recognize Caesaros Augustus, which is Emperor Augustus.
Yes, Caesaros Augustus, Emperor Augustus. And so that's in the first verse here. So there's a very well-known passage of scripture that starts by talking about Caesar Augustus. But let's not say it out loud yet. What other proper names do we see?
Joseph?
Yeah, we've got Joseph. He's down here in line 4. Joseph. Good. What other proper names? We've got some place names.
Yeah, Bethlehem is, I'm not going to say it correctly, so I'm just
Yeah.
going to say the English
Here it
version.
is. There's Bethlehem. It's kind of spelled funny here, though. We're going to talk about spelling later, and maybe why you should not worry about it, because they didn't worry about it. But Bethlehem. So yeah, what other proper names do people?
Is that Nazareth?
Yeah, Nazareth. We've got Nazareth, Bethlehem.
And Galileus is just before Nazareth.
Galileus, that's Galilee, right? Good job.
I'm
This one?
totally butchering it. Yes, is that
Yeah.
like Judea?
Yeah, that's Judea. Yeah. There are a few more. They're harder though. They get harder for me, but there are a few more proper names here.
So
Welcome. Huh?
Is that in line 3 Kurios? As in
This
like
one?
Lord? Yeah, or am I just like off base?
Okay, it looks a lot like the word for Lord that we've learned, Kyrie, but it's not that. It is a proper name though.
Okay.
Probably be a hard one to guess unless you know what passage this is and you know what. Proper names. Anybody see any others?
Is there Surias? Is that right before that? So like Syria?
Yeah, this is Syria. Syria. And I'll tell you this one unless someone has a guess. Kuriniu was how the Greeks here would best spell a very Latin name, which is Quirinius. So they don't have a Q, so they sound it out, and that's what they got. Let me see. We've also got, there's 1 or 2 more, but that's okay. So just to quickly scan this, it's a familiar passage, not expecting anybody to be able to follow me, but just so we kind of see and hear some Greek. And if you want to try and pronounce it along with me. egeneto, de en tais, hemerais. Remember that little apostrophe going that way makes the ha sound, and the one this way doesn't. So hemerais, ekenias, exelthein dogma para Caesaros Augustu. So egeneto, the first word, is the word that is often translated in the Bible, particularly in the King James, it came to pass, which sounds like super old-fashioned, but actually is a really good translation for this verb form that comes from the verb became or came into being. So it came into being, de en tais, and de is like kai, and it came into being in ekenas, those, hemeras, days, hemerais here, days. So it came to pass in those days that a dogma, a decree, is how we translate this, but it's interesting that the word is dogma here. Ex elthein, ex out of, elthein came out of, a decree came out from Caesar Augustus, that apograpsetai, apo, down, grapse, kind of like graph, or we get a lot of English derivatives from this verb root word for to write, that pasan, everyone, should be written down, tein oikumenein. Oikos is the household from which we get economy. Oikoumene is like the household of household, all the households, so the whole world. That the whole world should be written down, or in other words, have a census. Haute he apographe prote egeneta hegemoneuantas tes surias curinu. This was the first apograpse, prote, like proto, is the first census that happened, while Quirinius, this word, was governor of Syria. And so we keep going, and this is going to be the beginning of the birth narrative in Luke that's often read on Christmas Eve, and in Charlie Brown Christmas Story, which is maybe the best Christmas movie. So when we get on down, we skip a line, and then, well, we can keep going. I don't know, I'm boring y'all, but Kai and everyone, Pontus, everyone would go, apograpsetai, to be registered, to be a part of the census, and everyone would go to Idion, their own Poland, like polis is city. So then Joseph goes to out of Galilee, from Nazareth, into Judea, into polis, city of David. Kaletai was called, kaleo is a verb for to call, which was called Bethlehem. So we know where we're going from here. It's kind of interesting reading anything in a different language because we encounter it maybe without some of the very familiar phrasing. And I feel like whenever we read like the Christmas text, like we picture like the lights dimming and like the Charlie Brown Christmas music, or being in church with our candles. And so to encounter text in a different way, especially scripture, I think is a healthy thing because it kind of takes that mist off of it and allows us to encounter it in a new way. So thanks for trying that with me and noticing some of the proper names and words. So we'll keep going tonight, and tonight we're gonna look at some vocabulary that are just a few important theological words, and then we're gonna look at some manuscripts and talk about manuscript history. So as we've done before, I'll put a Greek word on the slide, give you a second to look at it. then practice pronouncing it. And then we'll talk about what it means. Maybe I'll give you a space to guess what it means and talk about the implications of these words. This is the first word. Okay, at first I was like, I'm gonna be real smooth and pull these all from the real manuscripts, but trying to blow them up, it just got pixelated. But because some of them look different when they're written in different manuscripts. But this one is kata, and it's a preposition. And I should have given you a chance to try to pronounce it. Hopefully you're trying along with me. Kata. And this one means according to. But this word is important because this is the title of all of the Gospels in the Bible. In the Greek Bible and on the manuscript pages, they're all like kata Yohanan, according to John, or kata Markon, according to Mark. And so that's what they were called, whereas we would call them like the Gospel of blah, blah, blah. That's a much later invention. They just marked it this way. The next one, try pronouncing it to yourself. Huh, interesting, Sophie. Yeah, that's a neat distinction. Yeah, I think it's primarily in English. And I think it's a result of the King James that we got the Gospel of this as like a title of the book. Feel free to like put things in the chat and or speak up and interrupt anytime. This one is an important word and theological concept in the New Testament that gets debated a lot what it means. Try pronouncing it. It has a rough breathing. Good try, you're close. It sounds like that kind of. It's hamartia. With the rough breathing. Hamartia. Kind of sounds like, it looks like Arimathea. This is a word for sin. And so this is a hotly debated Greek word because what does this mean? What does it encompass? It's not a word that's used a lot in Greek otherwise because, we don't go around like talking about sin in our daily life, and maybe the ancient Greeks didn't as well. It's not something that's shared among a lot of other texts from these ancient kind of parallels. So, but the thing is, this word also could possibly be better translated missing the mark because of etymologically where it comes from, missing the mark. So we think of sin as like a really heavy thing, but it could also be translated error or mistake, or just it's the root of this word is like has to do with target practice and archery, or like that kind of thing. Like you missed.
So we'd find hamartia in like the Iliad or something. So and so missed with his javelin or something.
Yeah, you would.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, but this is the word for sin in the Bible, in the New Testament. It's not as much found in the Old Testament anyway, conceptually. So this is an important word, hamartia. This is an important word. Try to sound it out. It's a long one. Get some tongue twisters in Greek. And here we have starting with a vowel, so it's got to have one of those, either a rough or soft breathing mark. This one's a soft breathing, so no H sound at the beginning. But we have two gammas next to each other. So one of them will become nasalized and make kind of an N sound most of the time. So like an NG sound. When we see two gammas, it becomes like NG in pronouncing it. And so pronouncing this one, it would be euangelion. Guesses on what this means? You can break it up. It is a compound word. We love our compound words in Greek. So we would break it here. Angelion is one part. We do get angel as a derivative from this root word, but this is the word for gospel. is the root word for good, and angelion is message, or messenger, depending on how it's declined or formed. The gospel. So that's an important word. Not actually, it doesn't appear very much in the Bible, whereas Christians like to talk a lot about the gospel because we've adapted it as good news. Like we talk a lot about good news. This word is one that is also hotly debated and kind of hard to understand, but it is all over the Bible, both in the New Testament and in its equivalent in Hebrew in the Old Testament. I think I showed you this word briefly once before. Try to sound it out. That's a delta. It begins with this kind of a funny font. So it's doxa, that xa sound with the xi. So doxa, from which we get doxology. And this is a word for glory, splendor, or praise. But this is a hotly debated word because there are a whole lot of parts of the Bible that say like blah, blah, for, it doesn't literally say blah, but that say like so-and-so for God's glory or to the glory of God or something like that. You know, what do we actually mean when we say glory? Maybe I'm alone in this, but like splendor, it can mean in some cases praise, but what do we actually mean by that? But this idea of kind of holiness and resplendence and glory, and it might have a root associated with shininess, which also gets picked up in the Transfiguration story and the parts where Jesus is shiny. So, doxa, glory. This is a verb. Try to sound it out and then think about what it might mean. It's a verb. That's a sigma that it starts with, the internal sigma. This is sozo. This is a verb for save, from which we get the like noun form of salvation. All of it comes from this word. But here's the thing, it also means heal, deliver, and rescue. And so in the healing stories in the Bible, when Jesus heals somebody, it's this verb, and it gets translated heal. But when other cases, or even sometimes within the same chapter, just a couple of verses away, this same verb will get translated save, which has a much different, and we add on a theological meaning to that too, right? Like, so I find it really interesting that healing stories, you could say like, she was healed or she was saved, and then what does salvation mean? So we could go down like a deep theological rabbit hole here if you call into question what is meant by this verb and its offshoots. Healer, salvation, savior, all comes from this root word, which has to do with healing, rescuing, deliver, save. It's translated all these different ways throughout the Bible, but sozo. Here's an important one. Try to sound it out. This is another one that I feel like has been used to draw lines theologically. And it certainly is used that way in some parts of the Bible. Try to sound it out. Starts with a delta, iota, dikaios. And there's a lot of like offshoot words that come from this root word, which means righteous, right, upright, or just. Just like the last word for save or heal, I think there's a big distinction Or like we hear it really differently when we translate something, that someone is righteous or someone is right or someone is just. This root word, just like in the Hebrew Bible of the Old Testament, all the words for like righteousness and these kind of things and justice all come from vocabulary that comes from the court system in those cultures, and this does as well. So justified, righteous, but there are a lot of Bible verses that talk about being righteous or right with God, which we might understand as being in right or healthy relationship with God, or being in our right place with God. But honestly, this word has hurt people too, because this idea of righteousness or who's in and who's out, dikaios. Not too many more of these. We talked about this one last time. I just want you to see a couple of these again. Try to sound it out. Pistuo. And the verb form means, we translated the verb as to believe, but as I get on my soapbox again, I think we should translate it have faith, because the noun form is faith, and we always translate that faith, and I think faith we hear is different than belief. So remember, pistis, pistuo, these are important for faith. This one's important. This is the word to be. I am. Amy. Like you say it like Amy, like the woman's name. I am Amy. That's how you remember it. I am Amy. Except you're not, but that's the verb to be. And this one, try to sound this one out. It's ain, and that's was. It was. All right, I'm gonna go back to the beginning of the vocab part and try to remember and sound these out with me. Just look at the screen. Kata, according to. Hamartia, sin. Missing blank. Evangelion, gospel. Doxa, from which we get doxology. Splendor, glory. Sozo, save or heal or deliver or rescue. Dikaios, right or righteous. Dikaios, right or righteous. Pistuo, have faith. Pistis, faith. Amy, I am. Ain, it was. Okay. Now, any questions about the words I've shared or anything we've talked about thus far? Feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. Okay. Feel free to hold on to them and just share them anytime. Let's look at this. Talk a little bit about art and some ways in iconography, which is the symbol usage in art of any system. And so want to share some of the familiar ones that use Greek, and maybe you've seen these and some of them you're familiar, and sometimes once we know these things, then they jump out to us later and we think, oh yeah, I learned that, or you can kind of decode some things. So this is a very common type of Christian art in an icon style, but this is also found in mosaics and paintings and all kinds of things where we have a Jesus or God or a saint figure with a halo, and this is Jesus in this depiction. And here has the cross in his halo. We know that it's Jesus because he has the cross in the halo, but also because of the Greek words that surround him. So let's look at these letters, and some of them are letters and some of them are whole words, and try to figure out what's going on here. This is a specific style of Christian icon and depiction of Jesus, and the name of it is actually there in the Greek. So take a minute to look at this. And maybe put in the chat if you have any guesses what any of these letters or words mean. I don't know if you'll have any. Yes, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 words on this piece of art because they're real creative about how they do it. Yes, Sophie's right. Yeah. Yes. Good job, Jill. Yep. Yeah. So we have some clues here to figure out. Sophie's got the name right. This style is called the Pantocrator, which here we see Pantocrator, which is here. Everybody gets a little creative how they write, and handwriting is very indicative of the age or the era in which the people are writing. So within a given era, people's handwriting does not vary very much at all, and they write in very interesting and different stylistic ways. So here we see pi, alpha up against the nu. Pi, alpha, nu, tau, and then stylistically worked into, and there's an omicron there, panto, and then krator, kappa, rho, capital R, that looks like a P. And then we got a little alpha, tau, omega, and a rho there, krator, panto, krator, and this is ha, the word for thee. So this type of art where we see Jesus or God depicted in this style, sitting with a halo and cross or something, is called the Pantocrator. And Pantocrator, panto means all or everything, and krator, does anybody have a guess what krator means? It's close to the English, you just gotta change out the vowels. Krator. Change out the vowels. What is it? Creator. That's right. The creator of all. And so this style was developed in Eastern art, probably originating in Egypt and east of there around 900 to 1100 AD, and is called the Pantocrator because it's often associated with these words. And yeah, he's doing his Cairo hand signal. He's got his little sign down here. Did you notice this? And in this era of art, I also laugh because Jesus often has oddly long fingers. And so here he does. But we have Jesus the Pantocrator making the Cairo symbol. And then if we move up, let's go all the way to the top. Now, as Jill pointed out in the chat correctly, this I, what looks like a C, and then XC, this is Jesus's name. It's 2 words. This is an interesting thing that Greek does in trying to save space, both in manuscripts and also in inscriptions and also in art. When they didn't have room, or just stylistically, this is something they didn't write the vowels. And sometimes they didn't write a whole lot of the word, but they would let you know that they were doing that by putting a little line, or in this case, a squiggle at the top to show you I left some stuff out. And so this is that. So this is a word that starts with an iota. So we have capital iota for Jesus, Jesus. And here, this is the word Jesus, but they just like put a line over it. And then this ends with a sigma. Now, the ending sigma looks like an S, it's kind of stretched, but a lot of times in most of a whole lot of art and manuscripts, they drop off that bottom tail of the sigma, and what looks like a C is actually a sigma. So this is Jesu, and this similarly is the Chi or Christos, Jesus Christos. There is his name. And then looking here at the middle part, so we have Jesus Christ, the creator of all. And then here we have two more words. We have Ha, the Omicron, that means the. And then I always used to see this and think, oh, Omega. So the alpha part must be here under his head, but it's not, because sometimes you'll see, and like even on our altar at GLC, you'll see the alpha and the Omega. And I think we also might have Ichthus, but the Omega here goes with the new, and it's its own word. It's the participle form of the verb to be. And so it's the one who is. The one who is, or he who is. It's kind of another way of saying like the Hebrew version of I am the I am. So a lot going on in this piece of art. I encourage you, if you have never been, to go sometime when it's open, like during the Greek festival or something like that, to, isn't it St. Sophia's up here on Massachusetts? And check out the Greek Orthodox Church. They had a phenomenal artist do the mosaics in the ceiling. Who's been? Have you guys been there? And if you can use your Greek letters, and you can read a whole lot of things there in their ceiling and in their iconography, which is so beautifully done, this entire ceiling of the Greek Orthodox Church here in our neighborhood. So it's a modern art piece, but really in this kind of style, and you would recognize a lot. So, any questions on this? All right, keep going. Let's talk about manuscripts. And we're going to look at some together tonight. Here we have a couple pieces on the screen. The early Christian church preferred to write scriptures in a book or codex, a codex being the name for that type of bound pages, rather than a scroll. Why do you think that is? Anybody have a guess? Why would you want to put your scriptures in a book rather than a scroll? It's a very practical reason. Yeah, to keep it in order, it's not cheaper. It's kind of more apt to get damaged. Book seems more appropriate if it's not moving. Yeah, like if it's, you would have had one book for your community. Getting warmer. There's one other really practical reason why Christians put their scriptures, as opposed to Jewish communities who use the big Torah scroll. Christian communities use a codex, which actually some scholars think is a part of why the book eventually took off as, easier to read. How? You guys can put it in the chat or on mute. When you read the Bible, you don't need two people, or like, think about it. Like, so think about a scroll. When you read the Bible, you're not like, Genesis, let me scroll all the way through. So the Christians were like, nah, we're using books, because then you can just open to wherever you want to read for that day, rather than having to scroll through and then like roll it back up when you're done. So they were, because they adopted scriptures that included these many different books, and they would read from different parts and not just straight through at different times of year, they wanted to be able to flip to somewhere. Yeah, I am impressed too. I think they're all good. Scrolls are kind of a pain. And so in the ancient world, like ledgers would be kept, but also on schools too. So anyway, Christians like scrolls. Remember the difference maybe from your old history classes as a kid or something. Remember the difference between papyrus, which is paper on plant-based materials, that's sometimes woven or pressed, and then parchment. I'm doing this backwards. Papyrus, parchment is paper. Papyrus is animal skin, right? And so a lot of the surviving earliest scriptures of the New Testament that are in Greek are on papyrus, which are animal skins that are scraped and thinned and pressed, and really survived quite amazingly. And some of them are big, like the Codex Sinaiticus, which we're going to talk about in a moment and watch a quick video clip. But some of them are very small. So like this, like these two, like this is the whole thing. This is the whole surviving papyrus of each of these two fragments that you see on the screen. This one that the cursor's over is the oldest, thought to be the oldest papyrus fragment of the New Testament that we have, but it's like the size of like a credit card. It's written on both sides, and it's a piece of the Gospel of John, but it's like this much. So, but then this like goes into the mega kind of scholarly file for comparison, when now we have like 5,000 papyri fragments and full codices, plural codex, of scripture, so it kind of gets worked into the larger understanding. This one is a part of the book of Philemon, and that's all we have of that. But some of them are in full. And so let's watch a little bit about the Codex Sinaiticus, and then we're going to look at some of it together because it's pretty cool. And I'm going to try and pull up this. I know I'm going to need to switch the share on my screen, so let me do that. I'll just from the BBC. Here we go.
The collection at the British Library includes one of the world's greatest books. As a work of art, as an achievement in book craftsmanship,
I didn't share my sound,
and as a sacred text. The Codex Sinaiticus has no comparators.
The sound was good? Okay.
We could hear it both times. The first time it was just your speakers playing, and then you clicked the box and it came through louder.
Thanks. Yeah, you would think we would all know how to use this by now. Okay, now try it again. It's just the 2 minutes.
Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to show you some of the...
Okay. Yeah, any questions about that while I pull up my screen again on the slides? One of you chatted to me, I can't believe they're touching it without gloves. Most people do actually, and nowadays modern paleologists who study ancient tech or like very old books and ancient papyri and stuff, they say fingers at rest because then you can feel when you're touching, like that you're not going to rip it or something. So like for instance, we have a we have at church, we have a couple Bibles from the 1700s. And like I've gotten them out when we open the church to tourists and neighbors, and I'll show them to people, and I'm touching them and people are always surprised, but it's actually thought to be best to keep your hands clean. It's not going to ruin the pages or the books. So it's really cool to touch really old things like that. So let me know and I'll get out the old Bibles at church again. We don't have any old Greek papyri hanging around though, but let's look at a couple and let's see what you notice as we look at these on the screen. I'm gonna try and move this. Okay, so the word folio is a page within a codex, and so these are pages from surviving papyri, and so all of the Bible or scripture papyrus get a number. So in your Bible, if you have like a really scholarly Bible or something like that, or if you were to get a Bible that had Greek and English, you would see in the notes some comments that would say like, oh, in P46 it says this, but in P92 it says that, and that's referring to the text and the manuscripts specifically that from which different variants come. So here we see two examples. This one is, and they're from about the same time period. These are both very early, so possibly around the year 200. That these were written. We see a piece on the left of 2 Corinthians, and on the right we see a piece that we've been studying, John 1. And so take a moment and look at these. What do you notice about them? Put it in the chat to everybody, or just to me, and see what you see. We did this the first session, just looking at and noticing, yeah, no punctuation. So feel free to repeat things maybe we've talked about before. There's no punctuation here. Actually, there's kind of occasionally a little bit of punctuation here in these dots in this version, but that kind of mean periods, but kind of not. But in general, no punctuation. What else? Yeah, it's all caps. It's all caps. Which really throws me off in trying to read it, because the letter upsilon, the U, the capital is a Y, which can look like a Y like this one where my cursor is, or it can look like kind of like a T because people get lazy in writing the Y. But it's all caps, no punctuation for the most part. What else? What else do you notice?
I think what you were talking about like handwriting looks almost identical, like the same person wrote both of these, which is interesting because I don't know that very many of us, if we both wrote the same thing, would have the same handwriting.
Right. Yeah, and in a minute when we look at the Codex Sinaiticus, you'll see how uniform the letters are, and you might have noticed that in the video. And lots of different scribes worked on this, but the handwriting is like amazingly similar. Yeah, Taylor, the letters are really squished together, and to that end, there are no spaces. There are no spaces. So it just looks like a string of letters to save space, but that's just also how people wrote in those days. What else do you notice?
So I have a question about this in terms of like everything being really close together and the letters all kind of, one giant word. I know that there's like, they go every once in a while, you see it on Facebook where like there's something where everything is misspelled and there's like letters, but like your brain can still read it because it knows what it's kind of supposed to say.
Yeah.
Is that also kind of
That's
true?
What's happening here. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, it's exactly like that. Like those memes where like your brain can unscramble if it's this first and last letter, I think is often the same. But also if you like wrote a text to your friend, but you didn't put any spaces, they'd probably be able to read it without actually like stopping to think. There are some places where it might be challenging.
I mean, I'm thinking about like hashtags on like Instagram,
Yeah,
like you
true.
can't put spaces in there, and so
really
sometimes it takes.
Yeah, we don't put spaces in hashtags and we can read them. Yeah, good point. And I think to that end, we can see another language, and particularly we can see things like Greek and these old manuscripts, and they can be really daunting. But once you know the language, and like certainly the scholars who study this, it becomes much less daunting, and they're like just rolling with it. I'd also point out here that we can see a few examples of that horizontal line that goes over some letters that indicates that they have dropped out some vowels or even whole syllables. Yes, Abby, we're going to talk about misspellings next and show some examples of that, although I don't have any great visual examples, because you have to know a lot of Greek to know that things are misspelled, but there are tons of typos. And for instance, like here, this scribe is a little lazier than this one, I think. Although the letters are nice and it looks nice because of the visual contrast between the print and the page, this one is, their letters look different. This horizontal line should be here. There's some other stuff they're not as straight on, but I mean the handwriting looks pretty good. But yeah, so remember the horizontal line means I dropped out some letters. Anything else before I move off of this slide? Questions, comments?
Wait, because I might have missed this. Can you like show your cursor where there's a line through, like the horizontal line through it?
The horizontal lines, oh my cursor, the horizontal lines go above. So for instance, I'm trying to, right there, this is a good example. Oh, my cursor keeps like, there we go. Right there, where my cursor is, there, that's a theta, and this looks like a C, but it's actually a sigma. And that's part of why I showed that earlier too. So this is theta, sigma, and this horizontal line above it means vowels, I dropped out vowels. And this was very common. It's kind of like a, what do we call that in English? You know, like don't, contraction. And so this is a very common one, and it's theta, sigma. It's a contraction of theos, for God, theos. And, but they just put a horizontal line above it. Any other questions? And Crystal, you're never going to have to do this. I just think it's interesting, right? Here's the Codex Sinaiticus that we're going to look at in a moment. This is John 1. And so this handwriting, it looks like computer print, but it's handwritten by scribes around the year 400, like they said in the video, and it's in 4 columns. And they put these markings that in the column margins that sometimes mean different things, including they sometimes show, yeah, it's hard to read. These markings in the margins sometimes show where there were differences between this and other texts, because even by the year 400, there were already like different versions out there and different understandings. So sometimes they will notate them even within the papyrus themselves. Yeah, this one, the letters are close together. Like it's hard to, I feel like, keep your eye fixed on the page.
I will say the nice thing about hashtags is they only can be so many letters before you. That's not a whole.
Yeah, like I wrote you a whole book as a hashtag, no spaces. It's a little bit like hard to look at, but I feel like that if your eye was used to it and trained, your eye would kind of know how to parse these out. Let's talk about manuscripts.
Question,
Yeah.
Brett. So when they're noting that there's a discrepancy between this manuscript and some other version, Do we have some of those other versions? Do we know what they're talking about?
Sometimes. Sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes not. Yeah. Any other questions while we're on this? We're going to come back to looking at this in an online version that's kind of cool, and it helps you look at this and the printed and the English as well. I think their fees and C's here, their phis and psis here, look really dramatic and stand out on the page, almost like little but other than that, it runs together. There are tons of variations in this biblical manuscripts. There are some scholars who like to say that there are more textual variants, meaning differences, between one version of the ancient manuscript and the other. There are more textual variants, differences, than there are words in the New Testament. But somewhere between something like 90% of those are not meaningful. Most of them are not meaningful errors. There are tons and tons of spelling errors in the ancient Greek manuscript versions of the Bible, including, there's one example, I was trying to find where it was because people refer to this a lot, but I couldn't actually find the manuscript visual of it. There's this one passage where there's a word that occurs 8 times, and it's in one passage, and one scribe wrote this manuscript and he spelled it 3 or 4 different ways. And so they didn't have spell check or even dictionaries, and they, one could make the argument they didn't care that much about spelling. Very common mistakes happen often, and sometimes you can see where the mistake happened and backtrack it. For instance, there's one manuscript that's famous because in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, where that genealogy of Jesus happens with all the names, and it's so-and-so in the King James begat so-and-so, from Adam all the way to Jesus. There was and all these scribes, mainly by at least the 3rd, 4th century onward, they were priests and monks. And so you picture this monk sitting there copying. They're copying off of somewhere else to make their copy. And this one in that genealogy, he was supposed to, it was multiple columns on the page, and he was supposed to go down the columns, but he went across. And so there's this one manuscript that's Adam isn't the first person, and it's it's all mixed up, and it doesn't make any sense because he read across the columns rather than down. Oftentimes the monks will also think about if you're copying something. Sometimes especially if a phrase is repeated multiple times and you look down and then you look back, you'll pick back up at the wrong place. That happens. Whole verses, phrases, and pages get left out often from these manuscripts. Sometimes there are funny errors due to reduplication or skips. Word order changes are a big difference as well. So something on the order of those 90% of textual differences, even if you tried to represent them in the English, they wouldn't make any difference in the English because it's a letter different, or they left out a "the," or they left, which we weren't going to translate anyway, or they put it in a different order that's not going to translate anyway. So things like that happen all over the place. But there are tons and tons of differences, and it's a reminder too that we don't have the original text. We don't have any of the original texts. So we're working off of copies, and we have pretty good sense of source documents and where these come from, and from them we can even tell where the Gospels get their source documents, but they do have a lot of differences. So the study of this and the implications is called textual criticism, and that studies external information like how old the book is and the archaeological information of a fragment or a piece of papyrus or parchment. It also has to do with internal information like the handwriting. Handwriting is a primary tool in dating the documents, like I said. Also things like phrasing and how they make their mistakes. Internal information, they have certain like logical rules, like that things tend to be shorter in the original, not longer. So they have these kind of things. And then the last one, handwriting and linguistics. It's kind of the blending of all these. Questions about manuscripts? So now when you go to a museum and you might see something with Greek letters or an old Bible or an old fragment, maybe you'll be able to at least pick out some letters or at least know, oh, this is what that is, or at least kind of the water that it comes from here. Let's see. So we're going to look at a little bit and read together. So I'm going to stop my share and we'll pull up this website together, which I'll also include in the email for this week because that will be if you want to practice. I'm going to give you some specific places to go practice. So this Codex Sinaiticus comes from Sinai. That's where the word is. It is the oldest codex that's complete. It's not actually totally complete, like Genesis starts at chapter 21. And interestingly, the way the book is put together shows that there were some like pages before Genesis started, even though we don't have them. So what came before Genesis in this book? We don't know. This ancient artifacts are a story too about history and colonialism and who owns what. And so like this codex is an example of that because 4 different institutions from 4 different countries own pieces of this, but unusually they came together to scan it all and put it here online so that everyone could read it. So if you click on this website and go to see the manuscript, then you can go pick a book of the Bible. And let's go to our good old John. And here's John. Can everybody see my screen? And let me pull back up the chat. I'm going to zoom it in. So here we see the 4 columns of this very neatly written text. I wonder who would have the neatest handwriting of us. And I feel like it harkens back to maybe something that we've, as some people would bemoan, that we've lost as a culture is like having a set penmanship style and cursive and these kind of things. But here we have the beginning of the Gospel of John. I'm just trying to zoom it in so we can see it a little better. This website is cool, but sometimes a little clunky on the zooming in. So up at the top of the page here where you see my little hand cursor, you can see kata and then faintly Yohanan, according to John, the Gospel of John according to John. And then I'm going to zoom in even more. There we go. Now, what I like about this website is this panel right here that shows the transcription of the text so that you can do this because it is really hard to see. So here we see the, I'm trying to zoom it in a little more. Here we see the transcription, and then we can even, in some cases it'll let me run my cursor over it, but it does this, that you put your cursor and pick a Greek word, and then it shows you where in the manuscript it is. So it kind of does the work for you that way. How I do on the translation. And then it shows you the translation below it. So there we see the text itself, and we see, what else do you notice here then? What comments do you have? I'm going to send you this link so you can try it out yourself a little bit. I want you to notice the horizontal lines above some of these words, that there again indicate the dropping of some vowels. So we get this word again, the theta nu, thane, theon, which is the word for God, but they here have abbreviated and contracted that. And so, yeah. So this is the oldest Bible that we have like whole books of, from about 400, and you can go online and read it here and find some Greek. And you might feel like this looks overwhelming, and it does. You have to spend a lot of time to be able to like really clearly, easily read manuscripts like this. But if we look again at our Greek, we can say N, RK, Ain, Ha, that's an O, Omicron, Logos. Now look, they got to the end of this line and they're like Lambda, Omicron, Gamma. I don't want to run that word on to the next line, so I'm just going to write 2 tiny Omicron sigmas there, rather than run it over into the next line. So you see what I mean there. NRK, Hen, Ha, Logos, in the beginning, Ain was, Ha, the Logos, word, in the beginning was the word, Kai, and Ha, Logos, the word. Again, we see that sigma that just looks like a C at the end. In the beginning was the word, Ain, and was, Pros, with, tone, the, Thane, for Theon, God, and the word was with God. So there we have it. Oldest Bible manuscript. Does anybody want to like throw out a random? You could look at different parts. It is remarkable how all of it looks the same. Here we have some margin notes in this one, which probably has to do with the textual variant. Sometimes it's even like, it'll say things like, oh, this verse was left out. Yeah, that's what this one says, because this is the word for epigrapsein. It was written, and so this is a textual variant here. And it's interesting and says something about how they regard scripture, because they weren't trying to go for like perfection, maybe, or an idea that there was just one kind of, the scholarly word for this is the textus receptus, right? There was only one received text, but there's multiple here. So here we're in chapter 3. If we go back to, here's some Zechariah. It still looks like it's just a whole bunch of Greek on the page. This is the Hebrew translated into Greek. So there we go. And people spend their whole lives working on this, whereas some of you have other jobs, actual jobs. But it takes a whole lifetime to do this work, and people have dedicated to it. This page is much more faded. You can see stains and age marks on this page much more so. This is the beginning of Matthew, and it's hard to read. Crystal, you typed something to me privately in the chat. Say more of that. Oh, yeah.
So I pulled it up on my other screen because I wanted to look at some more of it, and it looks like a lot of the Old Testament, or what we would call the Old Testament, doesn't actually have this box that has the English translation in it.
Yeah. Because the Greek is so far from, I mean, it's a translation of the Hebrew, and yeah, they're not translating this from that. Yeah, there are some spaces, and some pages have big spaces. What happened here? Let's see. Looks like it's the beginning of a chapter. But yeah, it's kind of fun to look at. It's kind of neat that this was written by real people 1600 years ago, and we can pull it up and look at it, and a whole lot of people put a whole lot of meaning into it too. I don't know what's going on with these pieces, but yeah, so that is Codex Sinaiticus. So if you want to practice some this time, I'm just going to send you this website and some like samples to go and check out, and some interesting places where the manuscript does interesting things, and a couple beloved verses to go and check out and see if you can find, kind of like we did at the beginning, find some proper names and stuff like that. But yeah, that is Bible manuscripts and some familiar and important Greek theological words. So any last questions, guys? It's a good way also to practice like just recognizing the letters and things like that. And for your trip to the Greek Isles and recognizing street signs and being able to read just letters and place names, which I don't have a trip planned, but you know, there was a trip being offered to pastors that was like the path of Paul that I thought about for this year, but I did not go. So anyway, thanks for playing along and looking at some Greek with me tonight, and I hope you found it interesting and a little bit of history too. So yeah, I'll share this recording with others, but hope you all have a great night.